It happened without a bang. No cosmic shudder, no blinding light from the heavens. At precisely 14:17 Greenwich Mean Time on the 5th of September 2025, the world simply stopped. I was in a small, slightly grimy cafe in North London trying to make sense of some notes for a new project. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and damp raincoats. My wristwatch, a reliable old thing my father had given me, felt suddenly cold against my skin. Its second hand, which had faithfully swept its circuit for 2 decades, was frozen. It pointed accusingly between the 2 and the 3, a silent, unmoving finger of judgment. It was a peculiar, almost trivial observation at first, a dead battery perhaps, but then I looked up. The digital clock on the cafe wall, a cheap red LED display, was also stuck. It blinked a frantic, nonsensical pattern of half-formed numbers, a garbled cry for help from a machine that had lost its mind. The barista, a young man with more tattoos than teeth, was staring at his phone, his face a mask of confusion. He tapped the screen, then shook it as if trying to dislodge some unseen blockage in its digital veins. The quiet hum of the cafe, the low murmur of conversations, the clatter of cutlery, it all seemed to fade. A collective unspoken question hung in the air, thick and heavy like the London fog outside. Had anyone else noticed? Was I the only one who felt a sudden primal dread creeping up my spine? Across the street, the iconic face of a church clock tower stared blankly back at the city. Its great black hands were motionless, locked in an eternal, unyielding embrace at 17 minutes past 2. In those first few minutes, the world reacted not with screams, but with a strange and profound silence. The initial shock gave way to a collective, fumbling attempt at verification. Across the globe, millions, then billions, of people performed the same ritual. They checked their wrists. They pulled out their phones. They glanced at the corner of their computer screens. From the gleaming skyscrapers of Tokyo to the dusty markets of Marrakesh, the answer was the same. 14:17 GMT, 23:17 JST, 15:17 CET. Every timepiece, from the most sophisticated atomic clock to the cheapest plastic novelty, had been struck by the same silent, invisible force. They were all frozen, united in their sudden, inexplicable stillness. The silence was soon punctuated by the sound of confusion. On the streets, people gathered in small, bewildered groups, holding up their dead devices to one another as if seeking a second opinion. "Is yours working?" became the planet's new, desperate greeting. The digital world, our modern-day oracle, offered no solace. News websites were a mess of glitched headlines and frozen timestamps. Social media feeds became a bizarre echo chamber, with posts timestamped at 14:17 appearing and reappearing, a digital ghost of the moment time broke. The constant, reassuring tick-tock that had underscored human civilization for centuries was gone, replaced by an unnerving, empty quiet. The illusion of a functioning society is a fragile thing, and it turned out to be built on the back of a ticking clock. When that clock stopped, the machine of civilization began to grind to a violent, screeching halt. The first and most spectacular casualty was the global financial system. Trillions of dollars, pounds, yen. When the timestamps that validated these transactions became meaningless, the entire system imploded. The markets didn't just crash, they ceased to exist. Algorithms programmed to buy and sell at specific times went haywire. The stock tickers in Times Square and the City of London froze, then flickered into nonsensical symbols, broadcasting the death of global capitalism in a language of pure digital chaos. Transportation was next to fall. Air traffic control systems went dark. Pilots receiving conflicting or no data were suddenly flying blind in a world without a schedule. Emergency protocols were initiated, but chaos reigned. Trains, governed by intricate timetables, were halted on their tracks, trapping millions of passengers between stations that no longer operated on a known timeline. Even traffic lights at city intersections, programmed with simple timers, began to fail. The arteries of the modern world had clotted and the global body began to seize. Communication networks started to fray. While direct calls between phones still worked, emails, text messages, secure data transfers became unreliable, then impossible. The global news networks were crippled. Anchors sat stunned in their studios, unable to receive feeds from their international correspondents. As the physical world descended into chaos, the digital realm became a haunted house. Every computer, every server, every smart device on the planet was now a memorial to 1417 GMT. But, it wasn't a clean break. The systems didn't just shut down, they glitched, they looped, they stuttered. Security systems, programmed to change access codes at specific intervals, locked down permanently, trapping data and sometimes people behind impenetrable firewalls. Automated factory lines froze mid-process, robotic arms holding components in a state of suspended animation. The world's digital infrastructure had become a ghost ship, its crew vanished, its machinery endlessly repeating the last moment of its operational life. This digital haunting had surreal and honestly terrifying consequences. Hospital life support machines, many of which rely on internal clocks for dosage and monitoring cycles, began to fail or behave erratically. Nurses and doctors were forced to manually override everything, turning modern intensive care units into a frantic analog struggle for life. In people's homes, smart devices turned into poltergeists. Lights would flicker on and off, thermostats would blast heat, then ice-cold air. Virtual assistants would respond to questions with streams of corrupted data or simply repeat the time, the frozen time, over and over again. Early attempts to fix the problem only deepened the mystery. The most brilliant software engineers and network architects in the world tried to reboot the system to force a reset. But it was like trying to reason with a ghost. Any attempt to manually set a new time on a device would hold for a fraction of a second before it inevitably snapped back to 1417. It was as if that single moment in history had been burned into the very fabric of space-time, and our technology was now permanently imprinted with its scar. The digital world wasn't broken in a way that could be repaired. It was trapped, caught in a temporal loop from which there was no escape. While the world outside spiraled into panic, the world's scientific community mobilized. In secret bunkers and high-tech laboratories, from CERN in Switzerland to the deepest underground facilities in the Nevada desert, a desperate race for answers began. Physicists, cosmologists, and quantum engineers were pulled from their obscure research and thrust onto the front line of humanity's greatest crisis. Their initial hypothesis was that this was an attack, a new form of cyber or electronic warfare of unimaginable sophistication. They scanned the globe for a signal, an energy pulse, a weaponized frequency, but they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The silence was not just auditory, it was electromagnetic. The investigation then turned inward, to the very nature of time itself. The atomic clocks, the paragons of precision that formed the bedrock of our timekeeping, were examined with painstaking care. These devices, which measured time by the resonant frequency of cesium atoms, had all stopped. Not just the networked ones, but the isolated ones, the shielded off-grid ones too. It was impossible. It defied the known laws of physics. It was as if the cesium atoms themselves, all across the planet, had collectively decided to stop vibrating in their predictable way. This wasn't a technological failure, it was a cosmological one. The universe's metronome had gone silent. As days, or what we assumed were days, bled into one another, a new and even more disturbing phenomenon began to emerge. It started subtly, dismissed at first as stress-induced psychosis, mass hysteria. People began to report glitches, not in their technology, but in reality itself. A man walking down a street in Paris would see a woman across the road flicker for a moment, like a bad television signal, before reappearing a few feet from where she had been. A child playing in a park in Kyoto would throw a ball only to see it hang in the air for a second too long before dropping unnaturally to the ground. These were small, fleeting moments of impossibility, fractures in the looking glass of the world. These perceptual anomalies grew more frequent and more profound. The whispers from the void became clearer. In the eerie silence left by the absence of ticking clocks, some people began to hear things. Faint, distorted echoes of conversations that had happened hours or even days before the freeze. The laughter of children from a playground that was now empty. The distant ghostly wail of a siren from a past emergency. It was as if the audio track of reality was skipping, playing back random snippets of what had come before. Time, it seemed, was not only stopped, it was bleeding. Scientists, already grappling with the impossible, were now faced with countless anecdotal reports that defied all rational explanation. Now, on this day, the 5th of September 2025, we stand on the precipice. The world is a broken shell of its former self. We measure the passage of time by the rising of the sun and setting of the sun, a crude and ancient method for a species that once counted nanoseconds. Society has partially reformed into smaller, localized communities, bound by necessity and a shared, gnawing uncertainty. The initial chaos has subsided into a state of low-grade, perpetual dread. We eat, we sleep, we survive, but we are living in a permanent twilight, a world without a future tense. The great mystery of 1417 remains utterly, terrifyingly unsolved. No answers have come from the sky, no culprits have been found on Earth. The scientific community is fractured. The mainstream continues its fruitless search for a rational, physical explanation, sifting through the rubble of known physics for a clue they may have missed. But a growing, more radical faction is exploring the unthinkable. They are building new kinds of sensors, not to detect energy or matter, but to detect disturbances in causality itself. They speak of chronons and temporal fields as if they are real things. They are no longer just observing the problem, they are trying to communicate with it, to probe the very fabric of whatever new reality we now inhabit. They are listening for a response from the silence, and that is the most frightening part. There are whispers, unconfirmed reports from these fringe labs that they are starting to get one.